David, it's so nice to have you back.
Thank you, Rebecca. It is very nice to be back.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome one of my favorite authors, David Kindopp.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Originally, when I met David, he had just finished this marvelous book. And I read it, and of course since then, David has written a lot of things, and he's working on another book. But Dave, tell our people about this wonderful book. Tell us. Just tell us about this book that you wrote and what got you started on all this delicious international nonsense.
Yeah, right, international nonsense. Well, we're not talking about Singapore, Well, I was always drawn to, from the first time I visited Mexico, I was always very much drawn to Mexico. And Mazatlan was one of my favorite places originally in my pursuit of visiting Mexico. So I got captured by the idea of bringing a sailboat to Mazatlan and starting a sailing charter company. This was a lot of years ago, 20 plus years ago, and nobody was doing it, and it was an old funky harbor, and I just fell in love with that whole idea. So I went down there. I got, like I said, I got captured by that whole idea. So I went to Mazatlan, I bought an old boat, I fixed it up, I took it to Mexico, to Mazatlan, to get into the sailing charter business with a couple of Mexicans that had a ragtag sport fishing fleet there, 5 or 6 boats, and they were all beat up. And I met them through some mutual friends, and they told me, sure, if I brought a boat to Mazatlan, I could get in the sailing charter business. So all excited about that whole idea, I went and bought an old boat and fixed it up and brought it to Mazatlan. And this was before NAFTA and before everybody on the planet had a cell phone. It was a different era, absolutely, for sure. I mean, a lot of people didn't even have a landline in Mazatlan, and even those didn't work often. And so it was a whole different era. And I ended up writing about that whole experience, going to Mazatlan, bringing a boat, going through about 3 years of just complete craziness, trying to get legal, and back and forth a couple of times to the States, and bringing coming back. I sailed to Mazatlan. I sold most of my possessions, my car, everything. So then when I came back, I had to buy another car. I bought an old Jeepster, which is on the cover of the book, my old Jeepster, right? And I brought a travel trailer down to Mexico, to Mazatlan, and I got my papers back and forth. And anyway, through a 3-year period of trying to get legal, which never happened, I went through trials and tribulations, almost got arrested. Well, I was kind of under house arrest one night. I almost went to jail for illegal chartering when my partner said, oh, don't worry, everything is under control, and they kept reassuring me that, oh, we've got it handled. Well, they didn't have it handled. And so it was, I had one night, it was a very scary night, very scary, where I definitely thought I was going to go to jail. I didn't, and I'm very glad I didn't. As it turns out, I went later, the next year, to the jail to get a piece of paper that said I wasn't wanted for anything in Mexico from the police department. How they knew that, I'll never know. And because the guy I went into to get to further this whole permission thing, we went into the jail, and with my old buddy Federico, and we went into the jail, and we went into the office, and it's just this. I think I described the office as like a wrecking yard. You go to Sacramento, California, and you go to an old auto wrecking yard, and you go into the office, and it's all greasy and no light coming in, and everything. That's like the police station, and it was adjacent to the jail. And so this guy goes in an old World War II issue Army desk and an old typewriter, and he pulls out a piece of stationery from the police department. He looks at me, he rolls the stationery in the typewriter, he writes a letter that says, I'm not wanted for anything in Mexico, and signs it and hands it back to us, and we give him 200 pesos. And so now it's one more piece of one more piece of the information that's necessary to get me supposedly legal, which never happened. But it was a crazy time. It was a very crazy time. And I bought this boat in Sacramento, near Sacramento, California, and I worked on it there. And then I took it to Sausalito and worked on it some more. And then I sailed it from Sausalito to Mazatlan. kind of a roundabout way.
Is this extreme delay that never happened the reason you titled the book Manana?
Yeah, part of it, Manana doesn't mean tomorrow. But also because in Mexico, as anybody who's spent any time there knows, Manana, doesn't mean tomorrow. Depending on the definition, it could mean not today or sometime in the future when we get around to it, that's what it'll be, or that's what it represents.
It means perhaps then.
It means perhaps. And what really happens with mañana in Mexico is that you'll have a conversation with anybody about anything, any number of times, and if they say mañana, for them it might mean tomorrow, and it might really be that they'll do something or something will take place tomorrow, or it may mean for them it ain't never going to happen, and I'm just telling you what you want to hear. Or it might mean for them, yeah, well, I'm really honest and sincere about this, but it may or may not ever happen, and I'll get around to it. So you just never know. And so if you plan on operating with mañana, meaning tomorrow, then you'll be completely frustrated every day, every step of the way. You have to either pin somebody down, if that's even possible, or you just have to understand that, well, it may or may not happen tomorrow, and I have to do what I have to do, and if I have to depend on somebody else, then I better understand that it may or may not ever happen. And it's a tough way to do business.
Sounds like it's an impossible way to do business.
Well, that's why Mexico is Mexico. I mean, that's why it's taken Mexico a long time to come out of third world status, which they are doing now. And this book took the activities or the events in this book took place 20 plus years ago, and things have definitely changed in Mexico. And in the last 10 years, Mexico has gone, they've leaped forward 50 years in terms of lifestyle, middle class, technology, those kinds of things, and their attitude about getting things done.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So you had a dream, and you took it and banked on it and jumped into it and tried to make it a reality, only to find out it was just a dream.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think what I discovered in that, very, very vividly, is that if you don't have a dream in this life, you pretty much don't have anything else. And if you have a dream, and if you're in pursuit of a dream that doesn't harm anybody else, then that is a great endeavor. That is a great endeavor. Even if you fail, if you pursue something wildly attractive, then you've really done something in your life to really give it texture and breadth and patina.
I think that your writing was obviously extremely enriched by your experiences and devastation and joy in Mexico.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I never understood about a lot of things in life in terms of emotion and introspection. I mean, I began to be fairly introspective before I went to Mexico. But when you are stranded, literally stranded, let's say in Mazatlan, and your boat has been impounded almost, and you can't do anything. You can't work because in those days you just could not work. You couldn't do anything, and you still really can't. You can't take a Mexican's job, So there was no work and no money, waiting for permiso day after day, week after week, month after month. And sometimes I think I spent 3 months, 4 months one time just waiting, and with nothing really to do but just hang on and contemplate. And I had a few great books that I could read, and I began to make notes in my journal, of course, and do some writing. But the whole concept of learning to be comfortable with inaction is a real challenge. It's a challenge for especially us north of the border. That's a very big challenge. And now, I mean, I live in a way that I want to get things done, and I do get things done. But when inaction surfaces, I don't freak out. It's like, okay, what's that trying to tell me? Because inaction, I think, often tells you to calm down, relax, and just breathe deeply.
And ultimately, when you quit worrying, if you can,
Right.
it creates great introspection.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's a great Jimmy Buffett wrote a great song. And by the way, I mentioned Jimmy Buffett in this book a few times, quoting him. And I quote Jimmy Buffett, and I quote the Gnostic teachings of Jesus, and I quote Shakespeare and John MacDonald, and a lot of different authors that I introduce and conclude portions of my writing with those quotes that seem to encapsulate what I've written about in kind of a funny, entertaining way. But there's a great lyric that Jimmy Buffett wrote, and he talks about how he buys a watch, and he said something like, "I bought a cheap watch from a crazy man floating down canal. It doesn't have numbers or moving hands. It always just says now." and you may think that I've been had, but this watch is never wrong. And the warranty says, if I ever have trouble, breathe in, breathe out, move on. And that's a great way to look at life, I think. That's a great way to look at life. And protracted time in Mexico definitely creates that view.
I think that the thing you came away with, among other things, is a great introspection on people and differences. That's one of the gifts in your writing. That's what makes it so wonderful. Most of us have been cultured a certain way, and we see life from that view, period. But with each writing that you put forth in your articles, and David writes articles all the time for the Mazatlan Messenger, but each one of them, David, presents a different and, should I say, contrasting and embracing point of view. And that is a quality that isn't found everywhere. Most people, when they write, here's my point of view, period, over and out.
Well, I really appreciate that's what you see in my writing, because I don't purposefully set out to do that a lot of the time. Sometimes, yes, of course, I have a real plan in mind and I want to show or illustrate a certain idea or a certain way to look at something. But mostly I just try to tell the story as it shakes out.
But see, that introspection gave you a consciousness that said, okay, this is their reality and their point of view, and now I'm beginning to see it. And this is mine, and they're not the same. And where and how can they come together, or will they?
Right. Oh, yeah.
And that's great, because when people just lay down their reality and walk away, they lose one of the greatest points of real communication.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting, because having lived in Mazatlan, I've actually, the last couple of years I lived in Mazatlan, and it's really a great observation to watch the Gringos who moved to Mexico, Mazatlan specifically, because that's my experience. And some of them can do just what you said. They can embrace the difference, and they can achieve this amazing life with a lot of depth and breadth, and integrate into Mexican society, if you will, to a great degree, and really enrich their experience there. And some Gringos, they can't do that. It's all about their view, and why can't these Mexicans do it our way? And it's really interesting to watch Gringos living in Mexico and wondering why the Mexicans can't do it my way, which is the north of the border way, right? So why in the heck are they there,
Right.
But yet they choose to be there for any number of reasons.
Yes.
So it's a real interesting dichotomy in some situations, but it is fascinating to watch those folks that are there who just seem to blend right with it. They go with the flow, they get along with folks, and then the other people who are just kind of always at odds. They're always a little pissed off because the service was a little weird, or the waiter wasn't quite fast enough, or the French fries aren't like they are at, my favorite restaurant in, Cincinnati or whatever. Yeah, it's fascinating.
The quality that you bring out in differences is one of your greatest powers in writing, Dave. It really is.
Hmm.
Because if two people are exactly like, one of them's unnecessary.
Yeah, right, exactly.
It is by our differences that we create expansion of understanding, growth. Our differences build the bridges. And if we are refusing to even look at the differences,
right,
how can we create the bridge?
Oh, sure.
Cannot.
Right. And I really do appreciate the fact that for some folks it's difficult to get to understand, not embrace, but just understand or even get an idea about how to relate to another culture. You know, I've been back and forth and lived in Mazatlan, so when I go to Mexico, it's like normal to me. It's normal to me. I don't really feel like it's not jarring. But I remember sitting during the time when I wrote this book, sitting in Mazatlan, one of my favorite haunts on the beach, and a young couple sitting at the next table from somewhere in Utah, and believe it or not, and just being literally in shock, their first day in Mazatlan, and they're in there and they're almost shaking, you know, because they've never been out of the country of the United States, you know, and so they were just like they were on their phone, you know, in the lobby, couldn't wait to get out of the country, and when's the next flight leaving? We've been here 10 hours. And and I happened to overhear them, and I chit-chatted with them, and introduced them to a friend that lived down the beach, and so on and so forth, and they began to realize, oh yeah, this isn't so bad, you know. And then 5 days later, 2 days before they were scheduled to leave on their 7-day vacation, the guy was, you know, I saw him at one of the joints on the beach at 2 a.m, you know, hooping and hollering and dancing on the bar. So he integrated pretty well. You know?
He relaxed a little.
Yeah, so integration in terms of society, that's what I really love about Mazatlan. And it's not so much that it doesn't happen in this book so much, but over time, I have a really wonderful, great friend there that I've known for 30 years who I met during the time of this book, Roberto. And he's just like a brother to me, and I've lived next to him, and I've lived in his neighborhood, and I know what it's like to be in that kind of a scenario where you're really living with, quote unquote, the common person in Mexico, and that's a fantastic experience, you know. I didn't have so much of that in this book, you know, because I lived on the boat, and then for a while I lived in this apartment right on the beach. You know, I went down, I was like, I'm going to be in business. I'm going to live on the beach, you know. And it's the life, you know. It's the great life, you know, the palm trees and all that stuff. And that, of course, became highly interrupted several times, you know, with the confusion and craziness. But I think anytime and anywhere you go, especially if you spend time somewhere, you can get comfortable with the local culture if you're just open to it.
It seems sad to imagine that one could go into another culture and always remain uncomfortable. I mean, there may be just reasons for that.
Sure.
And then it may be just one's fear of the lack of familiarity.
Oh yeah, I absolutely. I mean, I've traveled a little bit, and I remember being in China, for example, for only 3 weeks. And so for 3 weeks, I was in culture shock. You know, I learned 10 words in Mandarin, and that just wasn't enough, you know.
Yeah.
And I, you know, you're in the airport, and, you know, there's the army with the Uzis and those kinds of things, and it's like China, you know, and you're nervous, you know.
Yeah.
And even now, I mean, in Mexico, I've driven back and forth to Mexico a few times, and when you go across the border checkpoints and the military checkpoints, and you got all these, you know, 21-year-old kids with their rifles slung over their shoulders and kind of swinging them around, and you want to know where you've been, what you're doing, and kind of look in the trunk of your car. It's a little intimidating, but that's intimidating in the States.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The military-like action makes you perk up and say, okay.
Yeah.
No matter where you are.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I was reading some O'Rourke. And he wrote a book called Holidays in Hell, and he talked about being in some country like Lebanon, and he said it's amazing how, he looked in the barrel of a rifle that was pointed at him, and he said it's amazing how small the hole in the end of a rifle is and how big a dent it can make in your social calendar. But,
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, and that reminds me, there's a part in this story where I'm, you know, I was in Mazatlan and I sailed down with a lady companion who was a sailor, supposedly, and she just totally folded during that trip because we had a harrowing experience on the ocean, and it was very scary, and she just wasn't up to the challenge, and she left right away when we got to Mazatlan. She was like, bye-bye. And, you know, so I'm there and I'm single and, you know, I'm floating around town, and I was dallying one evening with a lady on the beach after dark, and we were interrupted by a couple of federales, and they came up on the beach, and I can't tell you exactly what the situation was. You'll have to read it. But I looked up to see this rifle pointed at me right at my forehead, you know, and it was about 3 feet away, and that really changes your perspective. I know what that's like. So when I read that piece from O'Rourke's book, I got that, and
just because you were obviously a foreigner, or did you don't know?
no, we were like, well, probably both, but you know, these young kids, they've got their fatigues on, and they're just patrolling the beach. They're trying to keep it safe, which is cool. And it's probably 10 o'clock at night, and you know, we're on the beach and we're, you know, laying on a blanket or whatever, and they don't want, you know, they don't want the beach. They don't, you know, it's like, get a room.
I think it would be more shocking if you were in another country and that happened than if it happened at home.
Oh yeah.
Because you know you can communicate with
Right.
people that speak the same language, and you can say, "Hey, okay," you know.
Well,
But-
he spoke English. This guy did.
Oh, well,
that
good.
didn't matter to him. He was just enjoying pointing the rifle at me, you know, and you know, and scaring the hell out of me, which he did.
Yeah.
Yeah, which he definitely did. So and again, I think that what people say when they read this book is that they get a whole interesting sense of Mazatlan in Mexico that they never would unless you really lived there and really stayed there. And even some of the folks that live there, they're never going to experience some of the things that I did, because I tried to run a business or start a business. I was breaking a million laws, you know, state, national, federal laws. But my partner said, no problema, you know. And so here I am, you know, ignorance is bliss, right? And so I'm doing all, and I'm hanging out with my buddy Roberto. And when I first met him, he was living in a little shack, with tar paper shack, with a big 55-gallon barrel in the middle of it and a dirt floor for water. And so I'm seeing things that a lot of people that even live there permanently don't see. A lot of them do, because they're adventuresome and they get out and about. But what happens in this is you get a whole new experience about Mexico in this 3-year window that I write about, from the time I leave, pretty much from the time I leave Sausalito till the time I drive back out of Mexico 3 years later in my old Jeepster with my tail between my legs, because Mexico has just kicked my ass. But it's my, you know, it's like I was my own worst enemy in a lot of ways, because I believed people I shouldn't. I wanted it so bad. I just kept coming back for more and more. You know, I was like, pow! Oh yeah, give me another one, because I want to make this happen.
I think that's always a challenge for all of us somewhere along the line, that to have faith in the reliability of someone whom we like, and find out that we've been carefully taken down the yellow brick road.
Oh yeah, right. And again, you know, it's Mexico and it's Mazatlan. And Mazatlan's got a special reputation in Mexico, as I found out over the time I went there and came back and forth. You know, Mazatlan has a reputation of being kind of a beer drinking, hell raising beach town. You know, a bunch of crazy, illiterate, you know, people that live there. So if you talk about Mazatlan to somebody in Guadalajara or Mexico City, it's like, whew, Mazatlan, you know, are you kidding? You know, all those beachaholic drunkards live in Mazatlan. So it works a different way. I mean, I've had people tell me that live in other parts of Mexico. Mazatlan's a whole different deal. And so I didn't know that, and so it's a little bit more Wild Westy, you know, than a lot of parts of Mexico.
Wow.
Yeah, right. Wow.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah. And so you learn, you know, and the only way to learn that is to go through it. Right. And my partners, I mean, you know, they had a deal with Marco, one of the port captain people, and somehow Marco didn't tell somebody else above them, or they didn't pay somebody a couple of pesos enough or whatever, and somebody got out of the loop and got mad, and then they decided they were going to make me pay, and I can see that. I mean, if I was a Mexican and I came to San Diego and I brought my boat up and I started hauling people out and giving them a tour of San Diego Bay, without any licenses or permits, I wouldn't last long doing that,
Yeah.
So why would I really expect that to happen in Mexico?
Well, I can understand that, but eventually not being able to ever get them, ring around the rosies and all of the dead-end roads you
Right.
kept running into, and all of the doors you bumped your head on when you tried to go through,
Right.
that is really quite a story. That is extremely complicated.
I was very ignorant at the time, and all I would have had to do was find somebody, an official translator or whatever. But again, this was pre-internet. This was pre-www, worldwide, and so you had to ferret out everything you needed to find. I mean, you didn't get online and check out something. You had to go, physically go to wherever the office, the immigration, aduana, and all these different port captain. And I could have done that for sure. Had I been smart enough, I could have done that. I could have found somebody to help me. Roberto, at the time, he was a young, really young kid, but he spoke excellent English and Spanish. I could have said, hey, where can we go? But I was intimidated by his dad and his uncle that said, hey, we're taking care of it, And I thought, well, it's their country, their deal. And this was, like I said, this was pre-NAFTA, this was pre-cell phone and pre-internet. So it was kind of like, okay. And there weren't that many gringos in Mazatlan, and they weren't all gathered around like they are now. They're all twice a week, there's meetings, and there's all this stuff going on. And so you didn't have the communication that you do now. So it was a whole different world. Yeah, a whole different world.
I think we can all relate to that to some degree, though. I think that there's nobody that hasn't had faith in somebody that didn't come through for them.
Sure.
But the adventures that you had were scary, breathtaking. I mean, that is quite a book. That's quite a book. The thing I really admire about the difficulties that you had is that you came away with it as an adventure and not a threat.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You totally came away with it as, this is my adventure
Right.
in Mexico.
Right.
Some people would say, this is my in Mexico, and I can't ever deal with it again.
Right.
But you say, yeah, and I'm looking forward to going back.
Oh, and I have. I've been back a lot, and I've lived there again, and and I have great friends there, and I'm going to go back. No question about it.